Well, we're back. We're going to talk about layers now. Let me bring AutoCAD over. I brought up a drawing file. Not particularly atypical. This one didn't do the dimensioning and stuff and notes here, but this will work for what we're talking about. If we go to the layers here, you'll notice, there are a lot. If we bring up that layer dialog box we were using earlier with layer, we'll just drag it down. And you notice there's a lot of them. But let's talk about the AIA layer list to begin with. Let's bump this up a little larger. All right, the AIA, to standardize things, created a layer list using either a long format or a short format. They do the same thing. Once you're used to them, it's a lot easier to use the short format. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. This first letter is the discipline, whether it's architecture, civil, electrical, landscape, mechanical. You'll have a lot of different stuff. A lot of times you'll use C's for cover sheets, things like that. Either the second four letters or the second two are the family, whether it's like ceiling layer, demolition layer, details, elevations, floor plans, roof, sections, walls. You're like, wait a minute, why is a wall layer necessary? Well, remember the walls, we want walls to show up in both the floor plan and the reflected ceiling plan. If you're not familiar with the reflected ceiling plan, it's the same, it's the floor plan, but if you did it showing all the lighting and the ceiling grid and everything like that, we do these quite often, and of course those have to show up both on a ceiling plan and a floor plan. So walls are broken out separately. If you have floor to ceiling glazing, that'll be here. So you'll have a wall glaze if we use the long form, or AWAGL if we use the short form, as compared to where it normally is, which is a floor glaze. This is actually a modification of the AIA. The AIA, to avoid that, just made an A glaze and an A door layer in these cases. When you start using wildcards, and we'll talk about that later, it's a lot easier to put a floor door and a floor glaze because of how the wildcards work. But we'll talk about that more in a little bit. The last four letters or the last two letters, if you're using the short form, are, whether it's the dimensions, these are the four letters. It's usually the first two letters if you're using the short form. Say AFLDI would be the A floor dimension layer. AFL MC with anything cut by a cutting plane, that's usually really on the like ADT MC, a detail M cut. An A floor PA. Sometimes it will have a second patterning layer, usually because if you have this gray here, that's a pretty thin line. But if you have like a dot pattern, that layer is so thin, the pin weight that's assigned to that layer is so thin that they don't show up. So a lot of times we'll make an A pat, let's say A detail pat 2, it's got a heavier pin weight so those dots show up. If we have solid patterns, like a solid, not hatch, but like an actual solid fill, we have fill layers, all this other kind of stuff. A lot of times when you're doing these MSRF, the material surface layers, like in the case of detailing, you may end up having two or three. You may have to have an SRF far and an MSRF near, simply because, just like when you're doing elevations, if you have a whole bunch of movement in that vertical plane of your building, you got this part here and this part's a little bit set back, and this part's a little set back further, and this part's way back here. You may want to create more layers so that you have those as, those extra pin weights as an option. Because remember, the pin weight is assigned by the layer, and that's how we control it. Give you an example of how they look here. The ceiling layers, we input the other day these detail layers, but there's layers for the ceilings where you have the mechanical diffusers, We've got notes. We've got if there's any hat patterns. Sprinkler heads are broken out separately. The grid separately. Lighting fixtures. So, and that's true of the floor plan as well. Let's go down the floor plan. Notice it's got a lot of them. Everything from cabinetry to material beyond. What's material beyond? Let's say we wanted to indicate a plumbing line or something that's below the slab. That would be something that would be on material beyond. Don't use it too much in floor plans, but if we get back to our details where we're drawing details, frequently you're going to show some sort of object that's hidden we can't see right here, whether it's I don't know if I have one of those in here. A lot of times, let me find a detail sheet real quick. That would be just a lot smarter to just show you. Oops, I'm still in the directory. This is something I'm having to mess with now. Where's the XR plan? I think that's where the detail is. Another good example of layers here, because it's a big mess. I thought that, is it not on this file? Crud. Well, let's look at this drawing real quick. It's a good example of all messed up with layers. Dash layer. There is a lot of stuff on this drawing. If we look at, we got utility lines, we've got all these contours. There's the building outline itself. This doesn't even have the building inside. It's just the outline. This is a site. We've got, we're messing with some parking stuff here. But that's not what I'm really looking for. There's a detail somewhere with that drawing. Open. Let's go to that plan sheet. Yeah, here's some details. All right. In this case, if we click on it, that's actually ADTDI. I like some of the previous versions of AutoCAD because there was that was always displayed. It was right up here on the screen. Could tell you what your current layer was and everything else. Oh, to draw a layer, you come down here, find the layer you want and pick on it, and that's your current drawing layer. So now if I was to draw something, you'll notice it's that same color as the ADTDI layer. Didn't talk about that the other day, about how to actually use layers. One other thing you notice, if that ADTMB, remember you input that and it was hidden too? You're like, well, that doesn't look dashed. We have to assign a line type scale based off of the scale of a drawing. So if we put LTS or LT scale, I think this was ½ inch. I can't remember. You'll notice now our dashes are beginning to show up. But in this case, see how we've got this, we've got the earth hatch, that's on that ADTPA layer. But we've got this layer, this here, this is a ARC, the AR concrete hatch, ARCONC. And those dots won't show up unless we put it on a much heavier pattern layer, and that's why it's on ADTPA2. That's got a heavier pin weight. These are one of those fills I was talking about that we can use. One of your hatch options is what's called solid, and we can pick that and either assign it a gray or like a real color gray. Because one of the things when we were making layers, that's Thaw. I'll just do it my way. One thing you can do when you freeze stuff, when you freeze layers, and this isn't going to be the easiest way to do it, but we'll do it this way. Let's go in here and we're just going to freeze. Oops, can't freeze the current layer. Of course not. if we freeze layers, you'll notice things are starting to disappear from the screen. I think that's most everything. And now all that's left is my Z non-plot layer and the dimensions. This is a real easy way. If I wanted to grab all this stuff, by freezing the layers, I can then grab it with a crossing window, and as long as I don't get all of the polyline that's that boundary for the earth hatch, I can grab things really quickly and make changes to them, whether I need to move them, copy them, whatever. So that's one way of freezing and thawing helps. Another is we can go dash layer thaw and asterisk. Asterisk is a wildcard, and that will thaw all of the layers. Doesn't seem like, well, Mr. Lane, there's a button right up here to thaw all the layers. Why don't you just do that? We're going to find ways of making our own buttons to do this that freeze just the ceiling plan layers, just the floor plan layers, things like that, and it can be very, very useful. But we'll talk about that more later. For right now, we're not going to have, oh, here's a good example of using that non-plot, where it says Zern detail. That wouldn't print, but it's helpful for other people to know, oh, this is the detail that came from the Zern company on this particular thing. So we use non-plot identifiers on drawings all the time, or even things like, hey, we had to change this because of meeting on September 4th or something. And a lot of times we'll use those rev clouds, and we'll put that on the non-plot layer. So we'll scroll down here. Whee! And remember I was telling you we can actually assign pin weight to these rev clouds. This is true of line types too, or even polylines. Remember, polyline, we could assign a width to it. So we get width, and we'll tell it 1 and 1. And so now it's fat, right? Let's say we mess it up and we want it to be 1/2 inch. And I'll talk about this in another lecture, but this is convenient. There's a command called pedit, which is polyline edit. Pick, and we can hit W for width and tell it we want the width to be 0.5, and it makes it smaller. Well, surprise, surprise, pedit, if we pick on that, we can go width and tell it we want it to have a width. Yay, joys of pedit. And so we'll do these things all the time. This won't print, but it's something that tells the other draft people in the office, this is why we change this, don't fix it. Do this all the time. A lot of times we'll keep stuff like this. Let's say we're going to make a change, so we copy all this stuff off to the side and get used to doing things like this. Because when you're thinking, don't just, copy it to the one side and then doodle. Here, let's get back to that one we were working on a second ago. This is one of the reasons why AutoCAD is useful. Look how many copies of this I have. This is the existing site plan. And I've copied an option over here, and I don't think that's working. So I copied up, a couple more and started looking at different solutions. So what we would have done in the old days with butter paper and laying it over it and then copy over it, we can just grab the whole drawing, copy it to one side, and keep going. If this doesn't pan out, we haven't lost anything. So that's one of the real advantages for AutoCAD. So get used to using AutoCAD because you can start doodling in it really, really effectively once you get the hang of it, once it's not intimidating anymore. No. And we really don't need this anymore. But we were talking about the different layers. One of your layer buttons in here is freeze layer. And so if I wanted to not see these trees, there they go. Or the the demo layers. Oops, here's another demo layer. So are these window frames. Ook. Or the hatch is getting in the way. You can just, that's an easy and a very useful button to have handy. The stuff's still there, we just don't see it. Now, you'll notice layers, there's freeze and off. Why don't you use just the off command, Mr. Lane? The difference is when something's frozen, AutoCAD completely forgets it. It's like it doesn't exist. If it's off, yes, visually it's not off. No, it won't print, but AutoCAD's still calculating it. So if you have a large building with a lot of stuff happening, you're always better off freezing than you're turning something off. It'll speed up the computer time. Probably will never affect you in the smaller drawings that we're probably likely to do in class, but that is an option. Another thing, let me thaw all these things again. Dash layer. I'm going to thaw asterisk. Again, I could have used the button, but I didn't. I did it from the command line. I could have. One thing you notice about the AI layers is all the demolition layers end in D. So if I go dash layer, freeze, asterisk DE, any layer that ends in DE will freeze. Ooh, that's handy. I could have made that, let's say I wanted to, I don't have a file for it, but if I wanted to freeze, let's say all the ceiling layers, I could have dash layer, freeze, ACL, asterisk. The asterisk can go in the middle, as long as you're using it in a way that, it's like we put a asterisk, you're going to get all the layers, of course. Of course, engineers might like to get rid of all of our layers. So if their disciplines all starts with E, so that could be something useful for them. But that asterisk is very, very valuable. That's why this layer list is useful. Yeah, we could have just called this, like, let's go to the floor plan, because most people are familiar with those. We could have just called this cabinets, doors, door swings, electrical. But then, in order to freeze and thaw these layers, we have to come in here and pick one at a time, and it takes forever. So having that ability to control them helps. Anyhow, just some, advice on the AI layer system. If you get into an office, most likely they're going to use some variant of this if they're working with AutoCAD. It's been around for quite a while now. Most people are quite happy with it. Just like the AIA has a way of organizing the sheets numbers and stuff too now. We may talk about that, we may not. I'll see. But for right now, there's no assignment with this one. You have this handout here. If you want to just start inputting some of these layers, go for it. As you may have noticed, eventually they kind of get in the way because there's just so many of them. You're sitting here going, where's my layer? And scroll down, and oh my gosh, there's so much stuff. The good news is, if you have too many, there's a command called Purge, and we'll talk about it later. Purge gets rid of extra items in a drawing. You're probably familiar with it. Purge. There's usually a purge of in a number of different software. Like SketchUp, for instance, has Purge. And we'll talk about that on another lecture. But anyhow, so there are ways of getting rid of all the extra stuff if you want to, if you ever need to. So if you input these, put them in that acad.dwt, and you find later they're annoying you, when you open a file with new, you can just hit Purge and get rid of what you don't want to use that day. But all right, I'll hush up. Thank you very much.